John 13 and 14. Well, 13:1 says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." And you get the sense that John is kind of catching his breath, stopping the story that he's giving, and he remembers very wistfully a story of Jesus and his own, his followers. And so we've often had a hard time understanding the relationship of John 13 through 17 with the last Passover meal that is described in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because they're just so different, how John presents it versus how the synoptics. So let me give you my recommended way around that impasse. In John 12, verse 2, we read 6 days before Pascha, they gave Jesus a deipnon, a Greco-Roman dinner meal in the home of Lazarus. 13:2 says, "and deipnon occurring." I recommend that is trying to take us back in time to this story again the previous Friday. So 13 and on is to be read remembering what happened a week prior to Jesus' death. Read that way, as we'll do now, I think it'll make better sense of how to handle the Passover meal, which is yet to come. And deipnon occurring, a present participle, means we're back in the story of this previous Friday. Here's what happens. The devil having put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus rose from the deipnon and poured water into a basin and began to wash the followers. Again, the word disciple does not mean the 12 all the time. It can. So what I'd recommend is a story here where Jesus washes the followers' feet. The disciples, more than 12, again, are back in this chapter 12 story. This would be Lazarus, Mary, Martha, probably many unclean, lost sinners, those kind of words that we worked with before. And then he'll say in 13:35, "By this all will know that you are my disciples if you have love one for another." Again, I think that's more than just the 12 that he's angling for there. He's talking about all his followers, including Jews and Gentiles, together. And again, I think this really catches then one of the main themes of Jesus' whole ministry, that he's not out to just wash the feet of the 12. He's out to wash the feet of the world. And so that's why I think this story of the washing of the feet is this group back in chapter 12. Then, of course, if then your Father and your Lord and Teacher has washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. Again, this is more than just 12 washing 12. This would be the followers washing everyone's feet, those who are lost, those who are unclean, those who are deemed as sinners. We have the announcement of the betrayer. Now, here's why a lot of times we think that this is the story of the Last Supper, but I just think this happens twice. He tells the story, or he tells the group in front of him, that someone will betray him, and of course Peter leans over or signals to a person called, and let's now talk about him, the loved follower, sometimes called the beloved disciple. Now, if you were listening to the text, imagine again if you were a child listening to this story of John being read to you. Back in chapter 11, verses 3, 5, 11, and 36, 4 times, including that 4th time in verse 36 when it says, "See how he loved him," there is a person in the story that Jesus is said to individually love. 4 times in chapter 11, there is a follower of Jesus that Jesus loves. And of course, in chapter 11, that turns out to be Lazarus. He's raised from the dead. Well, 13:23 is our next occurrence of this word. And as we read, now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom at this dinner meal one of his followers, the one whom Jesus loved. If you had stopped and asked the audience at this point as they're reading or listening to the story of John, who is the one that Jesus loved, especially a child in the audience would have raised their hand and said, "Ooh, that's Lazarus." So I do believe, because of how the story has been reading, comparing John 11 to John 13, that the loved follower, the loved disciple of Jesus is Lazarus. And so as the story goes in John 13, at this large dinner gathering. Peter wants to know who is going to betray Jesus. He motions to Lazarus, ask him who it is. Jesus hands a piece of meat or bread, dipped bread, and gives it to Judas, who then, in this story, again, he is being identified, but only secretly, to to Lazarus. And then he, in this story, gets up and he leaves. Now, again, we'll see in the later Passover story that Judas does not leave. But here he does. He gets up and leaves, and of course it says, it is night. And then 1334, what has been new in Jesus' ministry? All 3 years of Jesus' ministry. Again, I'd recommend that obviously his teaching about the Father has been new and exciting and helpful, and a corrective to so many misunderstandings of how the Old Testament presented Yahweh. But one of the things that Jesus has certainly brought onto the scene in his own ministry is the love of the Gentile who remains Gentile. That idea, again, that was stewing in the Old Testament is clarified by Jesus. So now I hear in 1334 this line, and it makes sense: a new commandment I give you, that you love one another. That loving one another, again, would not be one of the 12 loving another of the 12, but it would be a Jew loving a Gentile and a Gentile loving a Jew, and back and forth. That this idea of loving one another is new in the sense in John 13 that never before has a sharing of a deipnon with Jesus as the head of that meal been more illustrative of the kind of feast in the kingdom, shall we say. Often the kingdom to come was pictured as a feast. And this, I think, is that picture of where there is love for one another and equality, and even the Messiah washing the feet of everyone present and so forth. So that's why I think this new commandment in John 13:34 makes sense in our reading today. It's not, again, at the Passover meal. A couple more things. A prediction of Peter's denials. Peter has already shown himself to be a very bombastic and out front person in the story, and Jesus predicts that he will deny him. In Matthew and Mark, they add this night, and in Luke he adds this day, showing again that the prediction of Peter's denials happens twice. It happens here at this meal, and it will happen also. The prediction will happen at the Last Supper a week from now. And then he says this: the ruler of this world is coming. This is at the end of John 14. Arise, let us go from here, the last verse of chapter 14. We are not sure what is meant by that, arise, let us go. Nothing is said in the text about where they go. And I think it just means that these last words, chapters 15 through 17, were all said in a context of wrapping up this meal this evening. And before they left, these last 3 chapters, which we'll read tomorrow, these are the last great testaments, shall we say, of Jesus' instructions toward those who love and follow him.